if you're thinking about becoming credentialed with insurance companies, or maybe you're there already, maybe you're on several insurance panels, one of the things you'll figure out pretty quickly is that insurance billing can be a headache. And one of the things about it is it can also be very time consuming. But there's a great solution for that. And the solution for it is Practice Solutions. They're who I use in my own practice, and I can highly recommend them. They are a complete mental health and behavioral health billing company. They do everything from verification of benefits to credentialing to sending out monthly statements to all the things that you would need from a billing company, and they are the experts. So go check them out today at practicesol.com. That's just practicesol.com/Gordon, and give them a try today. Jeremy and their whole team will do you well. This is the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer, helping you to navigate your private practice journey. This is session number 66 of the Practice of Therapy podcast. Hello, folks. I'm your host, Gordon Brewer, and I'm so glad you've joined me for the podcast. If this is your first time listening to the podcast, welcome, and hope you'll come back and listen to some more and subscribe. And if you have been listening for a while, I'm so glad you're following me and that you're joining me in this journey. I'm having so much fun doing this podcast, and I like doing it every week. And so I look forward to being able to kind of tell what's on my mind and what's on my heart. And the best part is I get to talk to a lot of really interesting folks out there. But today, unfortunately, it's going to be just me. So don't switch it off just yet, but because I think you'll enjoy what I'm going to talk about, or at least it'll be hopefully informative to you. I had originally planned to have Laura Long on the podcast with me. For those of you that might not know Laura, she is the person behind it's called, and I'm using air quotes here, your badass therapy practice, private practice. I think that's right, Laura. But anyway, Laura wasn't able to join me for this episode today because she's got the flu. So Laura, if you're listening to this, get well. And I'm going to have her, we're going to regroup here, and I am going to get her on the podcast, and she's so much fun. And I think you're going to enjoy Laura when she does come. So, but Laura's got a YouTube channel that she started this year, and it is awesome. And so I'll commend that to you, and I'm sure we'll talk about that when she comes on the podcast. So, but here it is as I'm recording this. It's February already, and it's still snowing outside, or at least a little bit. It's not accumulating much, but, I don't know about you, but I'm ready for some warmer weather. I think I did, this time of year, I just, you kind of get into hibernation mode, and I'm ready for some spring weather, which it won't be long. At least here in East Tennessee, spring comes around the end of March. So it'll be here eventually. Quick little fun story to tell you here. And this is just, I'm just kind of telling part of my life, which is part of what I do here on the podcast. But back at Christmas, my wife and daughter gave one of the presents they gave me for Christmas was one of those DNA tests. And the particular one they gave me was with Ancestry. I'm sure you've seen the commercials or whatever, but I got the results back this past weekend. And, I wasn't too surprised at the results of it. I kind of knew some of that just from family lore, but I guess there was one part about it wasn't so much that what was in it that surprised me, but what wasn't in it that surprised me. I had always heard in our family lore and family myths is that we had some Native American blood in us. And turns out that's not true. Turns out that I'm very, very much English and Welsh. Irish and Scottish is the majority of my DNA, with a smattering of Swedish, Swedish, German, and French. So that's who I am, and I'm just going to have to embrace that. Even though I liked our family lore better, I just thought that was cool. So, but anyway, if any of you out there have done the DNA tests and you were surprised by them or whatever, I'd love to hear from you. Just let me know what you found out about yourself. It's fascinating stuff. Just that whole human genome project that took off, I guess, back in the late 80s or in the 90s, and I've just been fascinated by that. There was a copy, or I don't want to say an episode, but I guess an issue of the National Geographic magazine that came out, oh gosh, it was in the 90s, I guess, and it talked about the Human Genome Project. And I remember I was just really fascinated about that, and about how we as humans have kind of evolved, and just how the whole, how our race, or how our species rather, has spread throughout the world from just a little core group of humanoids in the country of Africa. And that was just fascinating to me. So anyway, I'm geeked out on that stuff and learned about myself, and kind of know what my heritage is. The other part about that was just really kind of fascinating to me, and just really, again, something I kind of knew or suspected is that I am very much an Appalachian American. Again, with those DNA tests, they show kind of the migration trends of how people came to the United States from other parts of the world, and they came from England and Scotland to the Appalachian region is where they primarily settled when they first came to the United States. So I am a true Appalachian boy. So anyway, and I'll quit rambling on about that. One of the things that what I'm going to talk about today, though, in this episode is I want to talk to you about taxes. It's that time of year. We get ready to do our taxes and ready for tax season. And the other thing that led me to kind of want to talk about this topic is I was finishing up the module, or the lesson that I'm doing in the Money Matters course on taxes. And a lot of times we get some misinformation about that. And there's some people that I've known in private practice that have created a whole lot of angst for themselves around taxes, and some people that have actually gotten themselves in trouble, or a little bit of trouble with the IRS, because they didn't have the knowledge and didn't really understand how self-employment is different than being employed. So I'm going to talk some more about that here in the episode, but to mention the Money Matters course, I do have it out as a pre-launch. So you can go over to practiceoftherapy.com/finance course, and you can get access to what I've got there so far. And the good news about the pre-launch is that I'm offering the course at half price. So take advantage of that while you can. It's only going to be for a limited time, but it's a way of getting folks in on it early, and you'll get all of the content as I get it pushed into the platform and get it out there. I've been working pretty diligently over the last few weeks to get what I have out there, and it's just I'm having fun doing it. It's a lot of work that goes into it. It's several hours. I record the lessons on video, and then I do the copy for the lessons and PowerPoints and all those kinds of things that go along with the lessons for the course. And I'm hoping that you'll find that it's a pretty good quality, and also that it's good information for you. It's just stuff that I've learned over the years about managing the financial side of private practice, which is nothing we really ever learn in graduate school. So that was my purpose in doing that. And I'd heard a lot from people about wanting to have that information. So I've done a lot of research, pulled all those resources together and put them in a form that's going to be easy to digest and easy to understand. I'm not a financial expert, so to speak, but I have learned a lot about it and feel like I can pass on a lot of good information to people based on what I've learned over the years of being in private practice. So I commend that to you and take a look at that. And I'll mention as well our sponsor for today is Practice Solutions, and they are the folks that help people with billing and insurance and credentialing and all of that sort of thing. And they're who I use for my practice, so I can highly recommend them. So you can go check them out at PracticeSol, Practice, SOL, .com, and then /Gordon. And that way you can get to their page and learn about Practice Solutions. So without further ado, we'll talk about taxes and doing tax stuff. You know, when I'm driving into work, especially this time of year, there's a tax preparation place that's on the way, and you might have the same franchise in your area or whatever, but the name of this place is called Liberty Tax Service, and this certainly isn't a plug for them because I really don't know anything about them, but part of their marketing thing is that they have people dressed in Statue of Liberty costumes. It's really kind of bizarre, but they're usually have a sign and they're jumping up and down and waving to people and trying to get people to honk at them and all that sort of thing. And it's really kind of comical. But the thing that it always gets our attention, or at least it does for me, is the big reminder that it's tax season. And for those of us that live here in the United States, and I realize that there are some people that listen to the podcast, excuse me, outside the U.S., but from January 1st until April 15th, which is the income tax filing deadline, we are just inundated with commercials and reminders that we are in tax season. And the thing about that is that most of us in our adult lives are used to filing our income taxes. For some people, it's not very complicated at all. They just do a simple tax form or do it online or use some sort of software like TurboTax or something like that to file their taxes. And hopefully, if all has gone well during the year and you calculated right with your withholding on your paycheck, you'll get a refund at the end of the year, and people always look forward to that. And then the next big onslaught, in addition to the tax preparers commercials, are the car commercials, because they're hoping people are going to spend their tax refund on a new car or something like that. So anyway, it's just that kind of that marketing cycle that happens. But anyway, the thing I wanted to kind of point out to you is that when you are self-employed, when you go into private practice, whether you even if you are a contractor for somebody else, in other words, you find somebody else that's in private practice and you go and contract with them, one of the things about getting paid is that there's usually not anything withheld from your check. And particularly for those of us that are self-employed, nothing is withheld from our check unless we do that on our own. And one of the things that a person could do is they can form an S corp or something like that, and then be treated as an employee with their company. And that's a whole other topic that I'm not going to get into today. But my point being is that where employment is different from self-employment is primarily around how we're taxed. Now, for one thing that most people don't realize is that when you are employed by somebody, half of your Social Security tax and your Medicare tax, which you'll see if you get a paycheck, you'll see those two line items on there as far as with the holding. Your employer pays half of that. So let me explain that a little bit more here. I'm going to pull up a sheet here that I've been working on. So two parts of the withholding. There's actually three parts, three and possibly four different parts to what is held from your paycheck as far as taxes go. One is your federal income tax, and usually if you're employed by somebody, you fill out what is called a W-4 form, and that tells the employer how you want to be taxed. In other words, how many allowances you're going to have so that you're exempt from paying tax on a certain amount. The other part of your withholding is your Social Security tax, and that is actually the total tax is 12.6%. And not to get too technical here, but that's what is required by the federal government for you to be taxed on, so that you're 12.6% of what you earn goes into Social Security. Then the other part of that is the Medicare tax, and that is just the tax for when we get over age 65, or if we, for some reason, were to become disabled, we would be eligible for Medicare, which is, most of us know what that is. That is just a health insurance for retirement. And so that rate is 2.9%. So there's a total of 15.3% of what you earn that is automatically taxed. There are probably some exceptions to that, but for the most part, that's what it is across the board. But one of the things about when you're an employee is that your employer pays half of that. And so you don't have to worry about that as an employee. But when you become self-employed, you do have to pay that full 15.3% of that to the federal government. Now here's the kind of caveat around that. And again, this gets a little bit complicated, but I think it's good information to have so that you understand it. When you're self-employed, you are really only taxed on the net profit of what you make. So one of the things that you hear a lot, and a lot of people have heard, we throw this term around a lot. Oh, you can deduct that from your taxes. So let's give a hypothetical situation. Say that you in 1 month in your private practice, you brought in $5,000. And so that was the gross amount that you brought into your practice. And out of that $5,000, you have expenses you have to pay. So things like your rent, your utilities, your phone. Maybe if you went to get some continuing education, you could deduct the mileage from that. You could also deduct the cost of going to that continuing education. Anything that is a reasonable business expense. In other words, something you have to spend money on in order to keep your business or your practice open can be deducted. So let's say you had a total of $3,000 that in expenses for that month. And so you subtract the $3,000 from the $5,000 and you've got $2,000 of net profit. Now, for tax purposes, you are only taxed on that net profit. So that's kind of how that works. So with that, then you are supposed to pay 15.3% of that to the federal government, plus whatever income tax you owe in addition to that. So one of the big mistakes that people make, and I know this was a lot of complicated stuff to talk about, to trying to explain this. I've always been told that if somebody asks me what time it is, I'll tell them how to make a watch. But anyway, I'm getting a little complicated. So hopefully your eyes aren't glazing over too bad. So here's the thing about this. when you are self-employed, one of the things that the government expects is that you pay your taxes quarterly. It's on the starting through in the tax year. You have to make a payment on April 15th and then June 15th, September 15th, and then January 15th. Those are your quarterly self-employment taxes are due. And it's an estimate, based on what you think your net profit will be for that year. And this is where it's important to talk to an accountant. When you get your taxes done, ask them about that and when you should be paying those quarterly taxes. Because if you don't do that, you could get dinged at the end of the year. When you go to file your income taxes, you could be slapped with a penalty for not having prepaid your taxes as a self-employed person. So I just want to make people aware of that. The other thing I want you to understand about that, there is no need to get all panicked, and there's no need to have a whole lot of anxiety about that. If you're just starting in private practice, if you haven't done that throughout the year, you might want to, again, talk to your accountant about what your options are around that. Hopefully, and here's another thing about that. If you are maybe working part-time and in private practice and you are working somewhere else and they are withholding from your paycheck for where you might be working, it might be that what you can do is actually have them take out more out of that check to cover what you would owe at the end of the year, even with your self-employment. Again, it's all done through math when you do your tax forms. That's why there's so many different spaces on your tax forms and stuff. And so, but I guess my point is that one of the things that I really, really want you to understand is do pay your taxes and really treat your tax bill just like you would any other bill. You wouldn't skip out on your rent payment, or if you're renting a place, for your office or your mortgage or anything like that. So treat your taxes as a self-employed person just like you would any other bill, and set aside that money each month so that you can make that quarterly payment for your self-employment taxes. So, so hopefully that makes sense for you. And I'm going to have a little more detail in the show notes. I'll pass this information on to my virtual assistant, Rachel, to kind of show some of these numbers in the show notes so you can maybe get a little better grasp of it. The other thing about taxes throughout the year, in addition to self-employment tax, there are some other taxes that people sometimes aren't aware of that they might end up owing at the end of the year. For example, franchise and excise taxes. If you form an LLC or some sort of business entity, in most states, they are going to charge you a franchise and excise tax depending on how you're structured. And what those are just simply is a franchise tax. Let me give you the definition here. The franchise tax is generally based on the net worth or the book value of real or tangible personal property owned by a business. So if you own furniture, if you own computers, copy machines, any cash you have in the bank, any of those things, there is usually a tax on that based on the size of your company. The other thing that you're sometimes taxed on is what is called an excise tax. And that's generally just an additional tax on the income of your business and for the tax year. And those taxes are generally at the state level. Depending on your state, in most states, I've not heard of any any states that really require this. But another tax you might have to be aware of is if you have to charge sales tax on your services. I'm not aware of any states that actually do that. If you're listening to this and you're in a state that does require sales tax, I'd just like to know that. Shoot me an email. But that might be something that you have to take into consideration. For example, if you sell any products with your practice, there are some people that sell either books or things like essential oils or, nutritional supplements, things like that, as a way to kind of bring in extra income into their practice. If you sell those things, you're probably going to have to report sales tax and pay that sales tax to your state. The other taxes you've got to be aware of: if you own property, obviously you've got to pay property taxes. I happen to own the building that I'm in, and so I've got property tax that's due in the end of this month, as a matter of fact, for the county. And so you have to be aware of those things, to really making sure that you're putting aside for those things as you go throughout the year. And so one of the ways, again, that you've heard me talk about this before earlier in the podcast and earlier podcast episodes is adopting an allocation system, aka profit first. Of being able to take a percentage of what you make each month and setting it aside for these various things in addition to your profit. So I've got a category on for my profit first spreadsheet that is just labeled taxes, and I've got it set at a percentage that I know that will cover my taxes throughout the year, both income and self-employment taxes, but also the building taxes and all those other things. So at the end of each month, I take that percentage and stick it in the bank, and that way I don't have to worry about whether I can afford to pay my tax bill or not when it comes time for quarterly taxes. Also, with the my property taxes that are due at the end of this month, I've already got the money set aside there, so I don't have to have a whole lot of worry about that when it comes time to pay those taxes. So when it comes to your taxes, your income tax, your self-employment tax, all of those things, set it aside every month. And so that way, treat it just like you would paying yourself. You want to be able to have that money in reserve so that it doesn't create a burden for you later on. The other thing about taxes I want to kind of reiterate is the need for having a good way to track all this stuff. It's worth the investment to get something like QuickBooks or FreshBooks, an accounting software of some sort. When you're first starting out, you might not need it that much, but once you start bringing in some volume, start getting some regular income from your practice, having a way to track that is just going to be essential. I started out in private practice. One of the things that I invested in was getting the QuickBooks software, and I still use that, so I can recommend that. It might have too many bells and whistles for some folks. FreshBooks is another one that I really highly recommend, and just that I know that other people have used it and have been very well pleased with it. Both of those products will have cloud-based services. In my own practice, I just use the regular QuickBooks software that I've got downloaded on my computer. Maybe a little old school in that way, but it's just what I've been using since the beginning when I was started into private practice. So I've just gotten used to using it, and I know how to use it, and it's worth the time and worth the investment to purchase something like that. I think the QuickBooks software runs about $300, but again, to me, it's well worth the investment, and it does so much to help me in my practice. I can run the reports to to see what my income is each month. It also has a component to where I can do payroll for my employees, for my therapists that are working in my group practice, for my virtual assistant, all of those things. It tracks it for you and makes it pretty painless to use. You do have to spend some time each week. I spend in QuickBooks and make sure that things are posting correctly and that I'm able to keep a track of my expenses. The other thing about a software is that most all of them give you the ability to download your bank statements from your bank online, and that just takes a whole lot of work out of just kind of going through and putting in those individual entries. It just pulls it all together for you. So I would commend to you getting some sort of bookkeeping software, whether it be QuickBooks or FreshBooks. There's some others out there, and I'm drawing a blank as to what they are. But get something that's going to help you track that. Even in the beginning, just using a simple spreadsheet. And I've got, if you go over to practiceoftherapy.com, under the resources, I've got some simple accounting templates for Google Sheets that you can get. Again, those are good for just starting out. If you're just getting started in a way to track your expenses, track your income, and all of that. Because at the end of the year, when you go to file your taxes, you're going to have all that information. And having it in one place, in one platform, is just so helpful and well worth it in the long run. Again, as I might have said at the beginning, do check with an expert. Take the time to talk to an accountant, hire an accountant, and have somebody that can walk you through all of this. It's complicated. It can be very complicated stuff. But I think more than, you don't have to know it all with this stuff, with the taxes and the accounting and the bookkeeping and all of that. But having a lot of knowledge about it, just as, knowledge is power, and it will certainly empower you to kind of know all of these things. Like I said, it's also we're all worth the investment to hire an accountant, a CPA that can kind of give you some guidance on how to do this where you're located. The tax laws vary from state to state, and so, in addition to that, that's another thing too that I always forget to mention this because I'm in Tennessee and we don't have a state income tax. We're fortunate in that way. We make up for it with our sales tax. We've got about a 10% sales tax, and that's where the difference is. But we don't have an income tax. But the other part of being self-employed is paying that self-employment state income tax as well. And that's going to vary from state to state. So that's another reason to consult with an expert, somebody that is local to you, that can guide you through all of those processes. So hopefully this has given you some good information today. I know I've just really kind of hit the high points with this, but I guess really kind of the big take-home points I would want you to know about taxes is do understand that you do need to pay your self-employment taxes quarterly. And don't get caught into a trap of burying your head in the sand and not paying attention to that, because it could really come up and hurt you in the end in terms of getting to the end of the year and having a huge tax bill that you owe because you didn't pay it throughout the year, and also getting some penalties for that. So consult with an expert, consult with an accountant, and learn about self-employment tax and how it's different. Well, folks, I hope this is maybe giving you a little bit to think about, and hopefully you can digest this. It is complicated stuff, all these taxes and things like that. Do take a look at the show notes for this, because I'm having Rachel include in there just kind of a written explanation of what I talked about, so that sometimes it's when we're talking about numbers and talking about all these percentages and stuff, it's easier to digest if you can kind of see it in front of you. At least I know that's how I am. So hopefully this is giving you some good information, and hopefully maybe it's eased a little bit of the anxiety you might have around the taxes and just kind of understanding how it works. So do check out the Money Matters course. If you'll go over to practiceoftherapy.com/finance course. And like I said, in this course, there's a whole lesson, whole module on doing taxes and what you need to know around that. And also gives you some more visual with that. And take advantage of that, of the course being half price during the pre-launch. I commend that to you as well. Do check out our sponsor for today, Practice Solutions. They are the billing and credentialing folks. If you are wanting to be on insurance panels, or just getting frustrated with the whole insurance billing piece in private practice, they are the ones to help you. They are the ones that help me in my practice, and they are who I use for my medical billing. And you can check them out at practicesol.com/Gordon, and go over there, and you can get get your setup for free, I believe is how that works with them, by using that link, Practice Solutions, practicesol.com/Gordon. So that's it, folks, for this week. Do tune in next week. We've got some great guests lined up. I've got, as I mentioned, Laura Long, who was, again, get well, Laura, if you go check out her YouTube channel. Also, I've got Laura Painter, who is a human resources expert, is going to be joining me and just talking about hiring people and building a group practice. And then I've also got another special guest coming. Got to get all that confirmed. I'm not going to say their name yet, so till I get them on here, I know for sure. But anyway, take care, folks. I hope the rest of your week is a stellar week. And thanks again for joining me on the Practice of Therapy podcast. Oh, and take time to subscribe to the podcast wherever you might be listening to it. Take care, folks. Been listening to the Practice of Therapy podcast with Gordon Brewer. Please visit us at practiceoftherapy.com for more information, resources, and tools to help you in starting, building, and growing your private practice. And if you haven't done so already, please sign up to receive the free private practice startup guide at practiceoftherapy.com. The information in this podcast is intended to be accurate and authoritative concerning the subject matter covered. It is given with the understanding that neither the hosts, guests, or producers are rendering legal, accounting, or clinical advice. If you need a professional, you should find the right person for that.